The first thing that went wrong wasn't when my wife walked in with another man.it, was when she smiled at him the way she used to smile at me when we were still pretending everything was fine, that I'm not exaggerating. I remember the exact second it hit me, standing in my own living room, holding a drink I didn't even want, watching a stranger loosen his tie like he owned the place. That was the moment I realized this night wasn't going to be remembered for the music, the food, or the jokes. It was going to be remembered for what people didn't say out loud. Before I go on, if you've ever lived long enough to know that silence can be louder than shouting, you'll understand this story. And if stories like this hit close to home, take a second right now to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment. I read them. Trust me, the party was my idea. That alone should tell you how badly I misjudged the situation. I'm Michael, 56, married for over 2 decades, the kind of guy who still believes that if you host people well, things tend to behave themselves. I spent the whole afternoon grilling, cleaning, arranging chairs like some suburban general preparing for peace. Friends from the neighborhood were coming. Old coworkers. A couple we'd known since the kids were small. Nothing fancy, just music low enough to talk over, drinks strong enough to make the talking honest. My wife Sarah had been distant all week. Not angry, not cold, just elsewhere. The kind of distance that doesn't slam doors but forgets to ask if you need anything from the store. When the doorbell rang and I opened it, I expected her to be right behind me. Instead, she stepped in after I did, laughing, with a man I had never seen before, tall, confident, mid-40s maybe, good jacket, shoes too clean for our backyard. Hey, she said brightly, touching his arm as if it belonged there. This is Jason. He stuck his hand out to me before she finished the sentence. And he's basically my boss, she added quickly, like it was important that everyone hear it. Basically, that Jason's handshake lingered half a second too long. His eyes moved past me immediately, scanning the room like he was evaluating square footage. Nice place, he said. You must be very accommodating. I laughed politely because that's what men my age were trained to do. Keep things light. Don't make waves. Especially not in front of guests. But then something small happened. Something no one else seemed to notice. Jason didn't let go of Sarah's arm. Not when he stepped inside. Not when she introduced him to Mark and Linda from down the street. Not when he reached for a drink without asking. And every time someone asked how they knew each other, she said it again. He's basically my boss. Each time, a little louder. I watched conversations shift. People smiled, but their eyes narrowed just enough. The room adjusted around him. Chairs moved. Space was made. Jason talked over people, never loudly, just decisively, the way men do when they're used to being obeyed without asking to at one point. I caught him resting his hand at Sarah's waist. Not squeezing, just claiming space. She didn't stop him. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I told myself I was tired. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself a lot of things men tell themselves when they've lived long enough to know how ugly the truth can get. But as the evening went on, I noticed something else. Jason never once asked me a question. Not about the house. Not about the grill. Not about how long Sarah and I had been married. It was as if I was part of the furniture. Useful. Replaceable. Quiet. When he raised his glass and said, "You must be very understanding." The laughter that followed didn't feel friendly. And Sarah laughed too. That's where part one ends. Not with an argument, not with a scene, but with me standing in my own living room, realizing I was the only person who hadn't yet decided how this night would end. I didn't confront anyone. That's the part people never believe later. They assumed there was a look, a tone, a raised voice. There wasn't. I did what men my age learned to do well. I observed. Quietly, carefully, like a man counting exits without meaning to leave. I refilled chips. I flipped burgers. I nodded through conversations that blurred together. But my attention stayed locked on Jason the way you watch a storm that hasn't decided where it's going to land. He had a talent for making himself central without asking permission. Wherever he stood, the room tilted toward him. When Mark tried to tell a story about his retirement trip, Jason cut in halfway through with a better one. When Linda mentioned her volunteer work, Jason redirected it into a joke about free labor. People laughed because that's what people do when they don't want to be the odd one out. Sarah stayed close to him. Too close. She laughed at his jokes before the punchline landed. When he spoke, she angled her body toward him, like the rest of us were background noise. Once, when I walked past them with a tray, she didn't even look at me, just reached out and fixed Jason's collar like it bothered her personally that I told myself I was imagining it. Marriage trains you to doubt your own eyes before you doubt your spouse. Jason finally acknowledged me when he needed something. "Hey, Michael," he said, snapping his fingers lightly, smiling like we shared an inside joke. "You mind turning the music down a bit? Hard to talk business with all this noise." Business that I in my house that I turned it down without comment. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to see how far he thought the leash extended. As the sun dipped and drinks disappeared faster, the atmosphere changed. Conversations got looser. Glances lasted longer. Jason leaned in when he spoke to Sarah, his voice low enough that I couldn't hear, close enough that I could see the corner of her smile tighten in a way I hadn't seen in years. At one point, Brian, an old co-worker of mine, leaned over and murmured, "So, your wife's colleague seems comfortable." I smiled. He's basically her boss. The words tasted strange when I said them out loud. Jason laughed loudly from across the room, clapping Brian on the shoulder like they were lifelong friends. "Your husband's a good sport," he said, nodding toward me. "Not everyone is." Something about the way he said it, like it was a test already passed, made a few people shift uncomfortably. I noticed Karen glance at her husband. I noticed Mark stop smiling. Jason poured himself another drink without asking. Then another. His stories grew sharper, more personal. He talked about long nights, about pressure, about how hard it is when people don't understand what ambition costs. Sarah listened like it was a confession meant only for her. When he touched her again, just a hand at her lower back this time, I saw it. Not everyone did. But enough people did that the laughter thinned. I still said nothing. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. Confrontation is easy when you're young. When you're older, you understand consequences. You understand that one wrong word can collapse years of careful construction. I waited. I watched Jason slip. Not dramatically, just in the small ways men do when they think they're untouchable. The way he referred to women as girls. The way he dismissed Mark's opinion with a smirk. The way he spoke about his home life. Always vague, always deflected, always ending with a joke. Someone asked him where he lived. "Near the city," he said. "It's complicated." Sarah laughed a little too hard at that. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger. Not jealousy. Clarity. By the time the sky went dark and the backyard lights came on, I knew two things for certain. First, this man had underestimated the room. Second, my wife had underestimated me, and neither of them realized yet that the evening wasn't over. Not because of what I planned to do, but because of what I planned to ask. By the time dessert came out, the party had split into two rooms without anyone meaning to. The kitchen filled with quieter voices, slower movements, the kind of conversations people have when they're measuring every word. The living room stayed loud. Jason's orbit. Laughter burst out there in short, sharp waves, like punctuation marks instead of sentences. I stayed mobile. That was my advantage. I drifted. I listened. I refilled drinks no one asked for. Hosting gives you a reason to be everywhere without being questioned. Jason had taken the armchair, my armchair, the one I always said was off limits because the leg wobbled. He sat back in it like a throne, legs crossed, jacket open, holding court. Sarah perched on the edge of the couch nearby, angled toward him, her knee brushing his every so often like it was accidental. "It never is." Someone asked how they met. "Work," Jason said. "Long hours bring people together." Sarah nodded. "You really get to know people under pressure." That line landed wrong. I felt it ripple. Karen raised an eyebrow. Tom, who'd been quiet all night, looked up from his drink and then looked away again. People don't interrupt moments like that, but they file them away. Jason kept talking. About leadership, about loyalty, about how rare it is to find people who don't take things personally. I noticed something else then. Every time Sarah shifted, Jason mirrored her. Every time someone else spoke, he waited half a second before cutting in, just enough to establish dominance without appearing rude. He was skilled. I'll give him that. At one point, he gestured toward me with his glass. Michael's lucky, he said. Not every man is secure enough to host his wife's professional circle. Professional circle that got a few tight smiles. I felt eyes on me then. Not curious, evaluating, waiting to see what kind of man I was going to be. The kind who laughs it off, the kind who explodes, or the kind who says nothing and pays for it later. I raised my glass slightly. I trust my wife. It was true. Or it had been. Jason smirked. That's good. Trust saves a lot of trouble. He leaned forward as he said it, elbows on knees, voice lowered, as if offering advice meant only for me. The intimacy of it was deliberate, calculated. Sarah didn't look at me. The room grew quieter after that. Not silent, just cautious. Conversations restarted in softer tones. Someone turned the music down another notch without being asked. I caught Mark's eye across the room. He gave a subtle shake of his head. Not warning. Recognition. Jason finally stood, stretching like he'd been there for hours. Mind if I step outside? He asked, already moving toward the back door. He didn't wait for an answer. Sarah followed him with her eyes. Then, after a beat that felt longer than it was, she followed him with her body. They didn't touch out there. I could see them through the glass. They stood close, shoulders angled inward, heads bent. A private world on my patio. People noticed. No one said anything. That's the part that still echoes with me. The way a room full of adults can collectively decide not to intervene. We're polite like that. We let things happen until they explain themselves. When Sarah came back in, her face was flushed. Jason followed a moment later, smiling like he'd just closed a deal. He clapped his hands once. All right, he said. Who's ready for another drink? No one moved. I realized then that the party had reached that invisible edge where something had to give. Either it would dissolve into awkward goodbyes, or someone would say something that couldn't be taken back. Jason picked up his glass again, scanning the room. His confidence flickered for the first time when he noticed the lack of response. Just a flicker, but I saw it. He looked at me. Everything okay? He asked, still smiling. I set my drink down carefully. Slowly. The way you do when you don't want the sound to carry. I think so, I said. I was just thinking. He chuckled. Dangerous habit. Only if you avoid the right questions. That got his attention. He tilted his head slightly, studying me now. Not dismissive, not amused. Curious. Measuring. The room waited. And for the first time all night, Jason didn't speak first. The strange thing about quiet is that it isn't empty. It's crowded. Every thought people don't want a voice stacks up inside it, pressing outward. That's what filled my living room when Jason looked at me and waited for whatever he assumed would be harmless. That I didn't raise my voice. I didn't change my expression. I stayed exactly the same man I'd been all evening. The host, the observer, the one refilling glasses and smoothing edges. That's what made people lean in without realizing it. I try to be careful about assumptions, I said. They tend to cause more damage than questions. Jason smiled, but it was thinner now. Fair enough. Sarah finally looked at me then. Really looked. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not anger. Calculation. Like she was running scenarios and none of them were coming out clean. I gestured lightly with my hand. Open palm. May I ask you one thing? The phrasing mattered. Neutral. Polite. Impossible to object to without looking defensive. Jason shrugged. Sure. That shrug cost him. He didn't know it yet, but it did. A few people shifted closer. Someone near the kitchen doorway stopped mid-sentence. Even the music seemed to recede, though no one touched the volume. I met his eyes. Held them. Not challenging, steady. Does your wife know you're here tonight? I asked. Or do you tell her you're working late too? The words landed softly. No emphasis. No edge. And then, nothing to no laughter, no gasp, no immediate outrage. Just silence. Jason's smile froze like a bad photo. He blinked once, twice, opened his mouth, then closed it again as if the room had stolen the air. Someone near the couch let out a small, involuntary sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a cough. Wait, a voice said from behind me. Wife. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Sarah's head snapped toward Jason so fast it looked like it hurt. What? She said too sharply. What does that mean? Jason chuckled, finally. A short, brittle sound. Oh, come on, he said. This is a joke, right? No one joined in. He looked around, searching for an ally, for a smile he could hook onto and drag the moment back into safe territory. There were none. Faces had gone still. Polite curiosity had shifted into something heavier. I didn't say another word. That was important. Jason took a step back, then another, as if creating physical distance might undo the question. He lifted his glass, then realized it was empty and set it down too quickly. You know how people talk, he said, attempting a laugh again. Office rumors. Misunderstandings. Sarah stared at him, not blinking. Jason, she said slowly, are you married? The room felt smaller then. Walls closer. Ceiling lower. Jason ran a hand through his hair. He glanced at the door, then at me. There was irritation there now. And something else, fear. I should get going, he said. Early morning. No one stopped him. He grabbed his jacket, fumbling with the sleeve, and headed for the door without another word. The sound of it closing wasn't loud, but it echoed anyway. For a moment, no one moved. Then conversations restarted in fragments. Whispered. Careful. People avoided looking directly at Sarah. A few looked at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Respect, sympathy, relief. Sarah turned on me, her face tight. What did you just do? She demanded, her voice low but shaking. I met her gaze calmly. I asked a question, I said. And in that moment, with the party still breathing around us, I understood something clearly for the first time all night. Questions don't create chaos. They reveal it. People didn't leave right away. That surprised me. I expected coats, awkward hugs, excuses about early mornings. Instead, the party did something quieter and more honest. It recalibrated. Someone cleared their throat and asked about dessert. Another person turned the music back on, just a little. Plates were passed. Chairs shifted. Life, stubborn and practical, moved forward. Sarah stood there for a moment like she didn't recognize the room anymore. Like the furniture had been rearranged while she wasn't looking. You embarrassed me, she said finally, her voice tight, controlled, the way she used to sound when the kids were younger, and she didn't want to lose authority in front of others. That I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. No, I said. I asked a question you didn't want answered. That was it. No speech. No accusation. No history lesson. She stared at me, searching for something. Anger she could fight. Sarcasm she could dismiss. I gave her neither. I picked up a stack of empty plates and carried them to the kitchen like this was just another part of hosting. That seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. Guests avoided choosing sides. That mattered. No one defended Jason. No one questioned my tone. A few people gave me small nods as they passed, the kind that say, "We saw what you saw." Mark clapped me on the shoulder on his way out. "Good night," he said. Nothing more. Karen hugged Sarah longer than necessary, then glanced at me with a look that wasn't judgmental. Just aware, by the time the house emptied, it was late. Too late for arguments. Too late for explanations that would have sounded rehearsed anyway. Sarah sat at the table, hands wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't touched. "You didn't have to do it like that," she said. "There isn't a right way to ask the wrong question," I replied. She shook her head. "You made me look foolish." I leaned against the counter. "I didn't bring him here. I didn't touch you in front of our friends. I didn't let it go on. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The room was quiet, not heavy this time, just honest. That night, we slept on opposite sides of the bed without discussing logistics. No doors slammed. No ultimatums. Just space. In the days that followed, people didn't call to gossip. That told me everything. Adults our age don't need commentary. They know when a line has been crossed. They also know when someone finally decided to stop pretending not to see it. Sarah and I talked later. Not that night. Not the next morning. Later. Real conversations don't happen on schedule, but here's what stayed with me, and why I'm telling this story. I didn't win anything that evening. There was no victory lap. What I did was reclaim my place in my own life without raising my voice or lowering my standards. Sometimes dignity isn't loud. Sometimes it's a single, well-placed question asked calmly in a room full of witnesses. And if you've lived long enough, you know exactly how powerful that can be. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever found yourself choosing silence until the right moment, take a second to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. I'd like to hear what you would have done.